Earth Legendaries suck. You might think Earth Season is hard, but I'll tell you why these Legendaries are not good. Today, we're ranking every single Earth Legendary so you can figure out which units to avoid, which units will age the best, and who is truly worth your precious, precious orbs. I considered how good they were in Arena, Summoner Duels, and Ether Raids, though I gave more importance to how useful they were in Arena because that's the mode you're forced to use Legendaries. But let me know in the comments, who do you use in Earth Season the most? I like units that can support the team because it helps a unit age better when their combat starts to fall off. But I didn't factor in Arena scoring because I'm looking for how well these Legendaries will age against the meta in the potential far future, and I'm more interested in what the unit can do, even if they're an old unit. Speaking of an old unit, in last place we have Legendary Ike, one of the worst Legendaries in the entire game. It's actually just sad that he's so bad when everyone can get him for free, because IS just hates making freebie units actually good. He has a super quickened pulse, a Luna that heals him, this encounter, and that's it. Infantries are quite good, but they don't have one particular thing that they excel in, and I really don't care about him when Omni tanks aren't that good, melee infantries aren't that good, sword infantries aren't that good, and most importantly, Legendary Ike is not that good. And in a meta where you'd rather have your units do multiple things at once and be amazing at it, Ike does neither. I'm not that crazy about his disencounter when you have save units, meaning your far save can just handle the ranged matchups for you. But even if you wanted an Omni tank and you didn't want to run a save, Ike cannot kill anything and he will die to everything. And even as Omni tanks get better in the meta, there's no reason to run Legendary Ike over any other unit. He did get better with things like Lagu's friend, but so did every other Omni tank in the game, and assuming you even had an Emblem Ike, well, just use Emblem Ike. Even Fjorm is better than this guy, and I struggle to think of things he can actually do. Ike is bad both because of better competition and because he sucks, and that's why he's the worst Earth Legendary in the entire game. Then we have Legendary Faye, a unit who is so bad that I'm genuinely shocked she came out in 2021 when she sucks as much as a refined unit who came out in 2017. Her kit is one of the worst kits I've ever seen. She inflicts guard sometimes, she has follow-up denial sometimes, and that's it! She has just 2 real effects in her weapon, one of which is nice to have at best, and the other is a contender for the worst effect in the game. At first, I was genuinely confused on why they gave her so little effects, and why she even has a condition on them when these effects borderline suck. And then I realized they probably wanted to balance the fact that she comes with Life and Ending, a Preference Miracle special, but they should have tried a little bit harder because, spoiler alert, her Preference special also sucks. It does pre-charge itself, meaning she's got a miracle that will heal her up back to full HP ready to go, and it sounds pretty great. That is, if you're delusional and you forgot about the fact that it only activates once per map. Fatal Smoke 4 exists. Miracle is already hard to have with all these nukers and brave attackers roaming around, and also, Fallen Maria makes everyone a better version of Faye for free, and even Maria isn't that good anymore. Even if you wanted a unit with Miracle, there's 3 other units in her own season that do it better than Faye, and I don't even know what she's supposed to do once her Miracle triggers, because once that happens, she cannot do anything. She will die to everything, and at this point, I'm actually impressed by how much she sucks. Infantries are already a questionable archetype, and so are dragons while we're here. But even if the day comes where you specifically wanted to run an Earth Legendary Infantry Dragon tank with Miracle, well, I genuinely cannot think of a single reason why you'd want to run her instead. And I don't even know what else to say about her, other than she sucks, and she's one of the worst Earth Legendaries in the entire game. Both Faye and Ike are not just bad, but somehow they're getting even worse, despite already being some of the worst Legendaries in the entire game. I can't think of anyone more deserving of E tier than these two. Then we have Legendary Julia. Because of the sheer amount of infantries in the game, I'm already very skeptical on most of them, and it would take a lot to impress me. And Julia does not. She has dragon effectiveness, some damage reduction, a guaranteed follow-up attack, she neutralizes her penalties and her foes' bonuses, and she has close counter when she's fighting dragons. And I also don't care about her, since dragons are not that good anyways, so even at her best, who cares if she's able to take out something that isn't even good? She also disables adaptive damage, but I'm not that crazy on adaptive damage in the first place, and I'm even less crazy about the thing that's supposed to stop it. And she also doesn't support the team at all, so she's a unit that is borderline dead weight that can't even help herself, never mind helping anyone else. Even if you wanted a ranged infantry, you literally have 2 other units in the exact same season you could run instead, one of which is also a dragon killer, and that's assuming you didn't want to run literally any other ranged infantry in the game. Some of the most powerful and most common nukers in the game are ranged infantries, meaning it becomes harder and harder to justify Legendary Julia with each new banner that comes out. The only thing saving her from E tier is the fact that she's an infantry mage, and I'd rather have an infantry mage than some of the worst melee infantries in the game, but otherwise I really don't want Julia either, as she's one of the worst Earth Legendaries even after her refined. Then we have Legendary Tiki, or what I like to call her, a single use of Farsave 3 that you can't even fodder off to someone else. Legendary Tiki is not good, and she's probably one of the worst Farsaves and armors in the entire game. Being a Farsave might be one of the absolute hardest and competitive roles to fill, with the sheer amount of incredibly stupid ranged nukes roaming around like crazy. Even the best Farsaves in the game struggle to survive against the meta, so don't even think that Tiki would do any better when she only comes with Dragon Effectiveness, some debuffs, Distant Counter, and that's literally it. She only has 3 effects, and that's with her refined by the way, and at this point, I struggle to think of what to even say about her. Tiki is not at all good, but at least she can take a single hit for your team before she instantly dies. And it's certainly a more meaningful contribution to the team than anything Julia can do, and that's why I put Tiki here. Even though she's one of, if not the worst Farsave in the game, just being a Farsave alone is incredibly useful in a turn-based game like Fae. It's certainly more useful than Legendary Ike at his best, and I guess it goes to show just how good save armors are in general. And since Farsave comes built into her preference C skill, you don't need to worry about wasting any fodder on her. That's literally the only good thing I can say about her, because otherwise, she cannot do anything. She will die to quite literally everything, and you don't want to run Tiki over any other Farsave in the entire game. Then we have Legendary Female Robin, yet another bad Earth Legendary with Distant Counter. Other than that, she also comes with Io's Shield, Foe Bonus Neutralization, Guard, and that's it. I have more fingers on one hand than effects she has in her entire kit, and that's with her Refine, and there's nothing to really say about Robin other than she sucks. She's a sitting duck that does nothing, she cannot kill anything, and she will die to everything. I really don't care that she comes with Guard, when Guard Echo is an X skill now, not to mention that there's so many other units that are either running some form of Tempo 4, or they can neutralize Guard with their base kit completely on their own. I actually think it's kind of interesting that she comes with Io's Shield in an age where most units don't have it, but I'd rather have effects that matter in all matchups rather than just with one weapon type like bows, although at this point, I'd rather have another unit altogether. She's only here because she's a melee flyer, meaning she can run all the skills that make flyers good and support the team with soaring guidance. I put Robin over Tiki and Julia because I value guidance support quite a bit. You'd certainly feel the impact of letting all your units warp more than a bad ranged mage at her best. And even though both saves and guidance helps your whole team, I value guidance more than saves even with the rise of Valentine's Myrrh. But I can see the arguments for putting Tiki above Robin, or by putting them in the same spot, depending on if you like save support better than guidance. And at this point, it's probably up to personal preference, because it doesn't really matter when all of these units suck, and you really don't want to run any of them. Also, I saw this and I don't know what to say. All of these units are not at all good, but Julia's here because I like ranged infantries more than I like Ike. Tiki's only here because I like saves more than Julia, and Robin's only here because I like guidance more than Tiki. Into D tier they go. Then we have Legendary Deirdre. In my mind, she's just a better Legendary Julia, but a better plastic fork is still a plastic fork. As a unit, her effects are more synergistic and effective than Julia's, and that's actually why I put her here and not in D tier. She has Dragon Effectiveness, a guaranteed follow-up attack, she disables adaptive damage, and she inflicts some penalties, but the main thing making her unique is her preference special. A 2 cooldown miracle that also boosts her special damage when it activates. It does sound pretty great at first, but even though I like this way better than Faye's preference special, everything I said about Miracle with Legendary Faye still applies here, and it's not enough to warrant using Legendary Deirdre over basically any good infantry mage in the game. I don't really care about her Miracle when infantry mages aren't usually the type to live things anyway, and even if you wanted to abuse it, you just can't when she doesn't have any way to loop it because she has no healing, and how it will only trigger once per map. The best infantry mages are able to nuke things, provide insane support, or ideally do both, and Deirdre does neither. I'm also not that fond of her ability to disable adaptive damage, and you'd think I would praise her for countering an effect that's becoming more common and prevalent through Hexblade and other support effects, but I'm not that crazy about Hexblade as a whole, and I don't think it's something that breaks the meta. It's certainly not a bad effect, but units that are designed to be bad on their enemy phase will die no matter whether you attack their defense or res, and the only matchups Hexblade might actually make a difference would be against tanks, except it doesn't, because most tanks nowadays have similar amounts of defense and res. Not to mention that they keep splitting off the tier 4 skills into just defense or res versions, which is anti-synergistic in the situations where Hexblade would actually matter. I only put her this high due to her miracle, but to be honest, I almost put her in the same tier as Julia at first. Although in the end, I think there's a point where a unit like Deirdre is good enough to warrant a team slot relative to the rest of the garbage in Earth Season, and you get more value from an offensive unit like her rather than a one-time use of Far Save or Guidance, and that also applies to every unit above her too. But it's also hard to justify using her over any other unit in Earth Season above her, and that's why I put Deirdre here. Then we have Legendary Alm. Even though he's this high, I actually don't really like him that much either. I'm not that fond of him because I'm already not that crazy about infantries, and DR piercing has never been more common, meaning he's really not that unique at all. He gets true damage even with AoEs, he neutralizes guard, and assuming his foe uses physical damage, if he outspeeds them by 5, then he gets a sweep effect, but his speed stat is not that good, especially not after the speed creep jump in book 7, so it's like the sweep effect isn't even there, and Alm's only other saving grace is his preference special, a 2 cooldown Deadeye that has extra damage and most importantly, fully pierces damage reduction. I can see why this guy used to be one of the best ranged infantries, especially after his refine. In an age where DR piercing wasn't really a thing, it's clear this guy would obliterate anything in his way. But nowadays, DR piercing is so incredibly common that you can basically expect it on any unit that's even somewhat good. Nukes are so powerful to the point where you just need to assume that almost every unit will take out any unit they initiate on. So every new day that passes is a day where Alm becomes less and less unique, and he also doesn't support the team at all, so he really has no other redeeming qualities other than being a ranged nuke. For the same reasons I put Deirdre over everyone else in D and E tier, I put Alm over them because even though he's only getting worse and worse, I don't think his offenses are so bad that I'd rather have Robin or Tiki. Even though he's getting outclassed as a ranged nuke, his offenses and DR piercing is the only thing that saved him from D tier, and that's actually also why I put him over Deirdre. But I was debating between the two of them for a long time, and I wouldn't disagree with any arguments for putting Deirdre over Alm. As units, both Alm and even Deirdre are much better than Julia, but to be honest, I really don't want Alm either, and that's why I put him here. Then we have Legendary Claude. This guy used to be a monster, and he was so good because of how crazy his kit was, especially given what the game looked like back in book 5. But nowadays, it's almost sad to see how this star has fallen. He has full null follow-up, and he inflicts splash gravity to his enemy and foes within one space. But the thing that made him so insane was his preference B skill, which gave him 80% DR when he initiates, then 80% DR in his first combat in player phase, then it gave him 80% DR in his first combat in enemy phase. 80% is a lot of percent, and it was so good in an age where we didn't have a lot of DR piercing, or even damage reduction in the first place. But I've already talked about how incredibly common DR piercing is nowadays, not to mention that even ignoring that, his DR only works against the foe's first attack in his first combat per phase, which actually isn't that often, and brave attackers simply don't care about it, which sucks for Claude when brave attackers have never been more common. And other than his damage reduction and splash gravity, he doesn't really have anything worthwhile in his kit. He's still a flyer, and like I said with legendary female Robin, even the worst flyer is better than Ike. In an age where flyers have never been better, I like Claude the most out of everyone we've talked about so far, and he's definitely the unit with the most meaningful contribution to the team. Similarly to why I put Robin over Julia, I put Claude over Alm and Deirdre because I'd rather have a bad unit with guidance instead. For as long as the unit's alive, flyers can support and benefit the team in such an incredible way, whereas at best, a decent ranged infantry is only pulling their own weight, and at worst, the moment they can't take out an enemy, they become outright useless. Even though Claude's still useful, he's really just a guidance spot and there's no reason to run him over any other flyer. And while I'm curious to see how good he'll be with his future refine, for now, I really don't want him either, and that's why I put him here. Deirdre and Alm are far from the worst ranged infantries, and Claude is a flyer that isn't as bad as female Robin. While all of these legendaries are not good, at least it's something, and that's why they're going into C tier. Then we have Legendary Nana. While I'm not that fond of Cavs in Arena, she used to be the best Earth Legendary in the game, and if you look at her kit, you can definitely see why. She's one of the most unique units in the game when she comes with Canto remaining +1, true damage, desperation, offensive null follow-up, 7 HP healing, DR piercing in the weapon, and most importantly, she's one of the few units in the game that completely disables defensive specials, meaning she just doesn't care about specials like Godlike Reflexes, Aegis, Pavis, or even Miracle, just in case a certain Earth Legendary wasn't bad enough. It's also interesting that she came with DR piercing so early on in book 6, when we didn't get most of our DR piercing things until book 7, and it's no surprise why she used to be a good unit. And I also like that she comes with desperation, although her speed stat isn't the greatest, so you might not always get a chance to use it anyways. And as time goes on, Not only has Nana become outclassed, but even her niche in stopping defensive specials have been made irrelevant. She's outclassed in her role in what is essentially being a player phase nuke. Even though she accomplishes it in a unique way, at the end of the day, she's just a player phase cav nuker, and in that sense, she's actually not unique at all. She's the type of unit that looks and sounds amazing in theory, but in practice, I'm not really sure if I'd want to run her. And at this point, I'd rather just run Spring Carla instead, who can do the same thing as Nana but better, and yet even Carla isn't the best melee cav nuker anymore. She's certainly not bad, but Cavs in general are one of the most common archetypes in the game. She has so much competition, and she also doesn't support the team at all, and I only see her getting worse and worse as we get better player phase Cavs, and that's why I put her here. Then we have Legendary Seliph. He was definitely one of the worst legendaries in the entire game before his refine, so it's impressive to see him this high. He's designed as an enemy phase cav, which is just a poor design to be in since cavs as an archetype are really bad defensively. But Seliph got a refine so good, maybe the best refine in the entire game, with so many effects that it feels like he got 2 refines at once, and now he's the gold standard of what you're hoping the refine looks like for your favorites. He has true damage, a guaranteed follow-up attack, up to 80% damage reduction, follow-up denial, 8 HP healing, enemy phase brave, and most importantly, a miracle built right into his weapon that isn't limited to activating just once per map. And his kit is really synergistic too, since the healing helps him loop his miracle. And he also has Null Sea Disrupt, one of, if not the most valuable and rare effects an Omni tank wants to have, especially with the prominence of Duo Leon. While he was definitely a top tier unit at the peak of his refine, Omni tanks are such a competitive archetype to be in, and we've reached a point where even Seliph has been outclassed there too. He's still a great Omni tank and he's the best enemy phase cav in the game, but he's not the best Omni tank, and I don't even think he's the best cav Omni tank. At first, I almost put him under Nana, and it depends on what you value more. Considering they're both outclassed in their given role, where you put them will depend on if you like an offensive cav more or a defensive one. In the end, I like Seliph more because Nana's kit is just a roundabout way of turning her into a player phase cav nuker. Whereas even though they've already made better Omni tanks today, I like Seliph for his unique combo of Null Sea and Miracle Looping. Although to be honest, at that point, I'd rather run this other Earth Legendary instead, and his name is Legendary Male Alir. In my mind, if you wanted an Earth Legendary who's an Omni tank, look no further than this guy. Not only is he a colorless infantry, basically the best unit type you could ask for from an Omni tank, but he has DR Piercing, Scowl, and the best effect in the game, Unconditional Brave on both player phase and enemy phase, unlike Legendary Seliph, who only gets it in his enemy phase. And he has a Preference A skill, a distant counter that gives him 40% damage reduction even on brave hits, and a one-time use of Miracle that will heal him back to full HP. I don't know why there's so many Earth Legendaries with Miracle, but weirdly enough, I actually don't really like Alir's A skill. Firstly, it gives him distant counter, which is nice, but I don't love it when he already had the privilege of using the distant counter Dragon Seal. And just imagine how much cooler it would have been if he had a much better effect there instead. Then, he can't loop his Miracle since the A skill only triggers once per map. Not to mention that he requires at least 3 allies to be near him for it to activate, meaning it's outright useless in any situation where you take out his allies first. While it's thematically cool and it will trigger as long as Alir has more than 1 HP, it ends up being weirdly more strict than even Legendary Seliph's Miracle, which itself is a weirdly more strict version of Brave Seliph's Miracle. And speaking of things that are thematically cool that I don't like, I actually hate it when engaged units have the condition where they want allies from distinct game titles. Male Alir has a stat swing when his teammates are from different games, but even though it's super easy to hit, it's just a restriction on stats when nearly every other unit doesn't have such a restriction. And it also either indirectly nerfs every other engaged unit that comes out if you wanted to use Male Alir, or it indirectly nerfs him the moment they make an engaged unit that's really worth using. While I love it thematically and it makes for interesting and creative game design, from a meta standpoint, it just sucks. He's definitely a better Omni tank than Seliph is, and I just don't think Nana contributes to the team more than Alir, both offensively and defensively. But he also doesn't support the team at all, so I really only see him getting worse and worse as they've already made an arguably better Omni tank than him a month after he came out, and they will continue to do so in the future. I can't really recommend him as I only see him aging really poorly as time goes on, and that's why I put him here. Nana, Seliph, and Alir are good, but they're only getting worse over time, and I can see them dropping into C tier in the future. But for now, they make their way into B tier. Next, we have literally nobody, because none of these Earth Legendaries are good enough to be put in A tier, and I'm constantly reminded that Earth Legendaries suck. Finally, we're looking at the only Earth Legendary in the game that I would think about using. This unit is not only one of the most cancerous units in the entire game, but he's a unit so good that even IS didn't know how to counter it. At the top of S tier, we have Legendary Male Robin. In my mind, he's living proof that IS doesn't understand how to balance their own game. This guy is not only one of the most broken units released in all of Book 7, but he's one of the most meta-impactful units they've ever made. On paper, he actually looks pretty underwhelming. He really only comes with stats and unity, so it makes sense why everyone underrated the dude on his release. But his ability to inflict exactly what he needs on himself is what turns him from good to so insanely stupid. Unity isn't a new effect. We've seen it on A skills and on entire characters like Fallen Ike. But what makes Legendary Male Robin so broken is that unlike everyone else, he not only gives himself two sources of unity that stacks, since Grand Strategy is just another way to get unity, but he's incredibly self-sufficient because he also inflicts debuffs on yourself, whereas everyone else in the game is reliant on their opponent to activate unity. And also, it's just such poor game design because every game on the planet, including Fae, is designed to give you ways to remove buffs on your opponent. Like, obviously, that makes sense, but why am I wanting to remove the penalties of my opponent? Like, why would they design a unit like this? Unlike some units that look pretty good in theory, but are just okay in practice, this guy looks just okay in theory and is so absurdly stupid in practice. And to this day, even IS is terrified of Legendary Male Robin, because they chose to invent a whole new effect to give to Brave Robin instead of giving him Grand Strategy. And even now, not a single character in the game has had Grand Strategy after Legendary Male Robin, as IS has never, ever touched Grand Strategy ever again. Legendary Male Robin is such backwards game design that IS had to try multiple times to counter him with things like Sabotage, Ploy, and Tsunaki. And despite how crazy he used to be, he's actually fallen off quite a bit. As a unit, even though his stats are crazy high, he actually struggles a lot offensively. And even ignoring Ploy and Tsunaki, there are a lot of other things we'd rather run nowadays instead of Robin, not to mention the prevalence of pre-combat damage. At first, I almost put him in A tier instead of S tier because I only see him getting worse and worse, and it's for that reason why I think all Earth Legendaries suck and why Earth season is the weakest season. I'm not sure if I can recommend him when I don't see any specific reason he would get any better. But if you had to summon for any Earth Legendaries, this is the only one I'd want in case the day comes where it's safe to have debuffs again. In the end, I felt Robin deserved a spot in S tier, not only because he's still pretty good, but also because every other Earth Legendary is so insanely bad. His support will always be somewhat beneficial, assuming the enemy doesn't have Ploy. He's aged unusually well for a unit IS tried to nerf over and over again, and when he's one of the best supports they've ever made in the history of Fae, it's no surprise that Legendary Male Robin is the best Earth Legendary in the entire game. Robin is a unit so good that even IS doesn't want to touch his effect ever again. He provides support like no other legendary or unit in the game, and it's no surprise he stands alone in S tier. But even though he's pretty good, I don't think he's as good as this one unit I talked about in my Fire Legendary tier list. Did you enjoy the video? Only if you did, then subscribe, and if you really liked it, you can become a member down below. I appreciate you for watching, and I'll see you again real soon.